but it was embellished by what one might call a whole series of feeder routes that ran north-south, connecting with the artery. These feeder routes included, at the East Asian end, the new commercial connection between Japan and Korea and China, where a regular series of exchanges and expeditions helped connect Japan through China to some of the rest of the post-classical world. More important feeder routes included the new pattern of trade running north-south along the Indian Ocean coast of East Africa, where the Swahili coast connected cities along this territory to trading centers in the Middle East and through them the wider world. It included north-south connections from West Africa below the Sahara, across the Sahara to the urban centers of North Africa. It included a trade route that began to be developed pretty early, running from Scandinavia through Western Russia and what's now Ukraine, running down to Byzantium and through Byzantium to the Arab world. And it included, slightly later, the pattern of trade that would run from northwestern Europe down to the Mediterranean and through the Mediterranean, again, linking up to the Arab world and through that to the east-west trade nexus. This was a very elaborate set of trading routes. We can trace it, among other things, by noting the considerable hordes of Arab coinage that can be found in places like Russia and Scandinavia, or parts of Western Europe, or many parts of Africa, that date from this period and show the connections that were now developing among different parts of the Afro-Eurasian world. This set of trading connections, the second major theme, along with the spread of world religions, this set of trading connections was not initially caused by major new technologies. This is not a period defined by a significant set of technological advances in the world as a whole, but the development was certainly sustained by new technologies, notably new sailing ships developed by the Arabs that were appropriate particularly for commerce in the Indian Ocean, new navigational devices developed by both the Chinese and the Arabs, such as the compass, and as trade expanded, improved map making. The Arabs became the most accurate map makers that the world had known to that point. All of these technologies and related support systems helped sustain and expand the new trade network, the new world network that connected these various societies throughout Africa, Europe, and Asia. Again, not a cause, but, if you will, an ancillary that began to gain importance in its own right. Two major developments, then: the spread of world religions and the spread of a new level of world, not global, obviously, because the Americas aren't included at all, a new level of world commerce that put connections among different regions to a new level of importance. One other device that we can introduce today will be useful in sorting this period out and also in interpreting the ways that religion and new levels of interregional trade began to reshape the world experience more generally. I've noted already, and it's inescapable, that the sheer number of civilizations begins to expand, definitional issues attach, and we will be talking during the course of discussing the post-classical period about the importance of giving new attention to Southeast Asia, obviously to Japan, obviously to Russia, obviously to different parts of sub-Saharan Africa, no escaping it. But there is a wider coherence that can be found in categorizing these new and old centers of civilization into one of three categories, depending on their relationship primarily to the new patterns of interregional trade. I suggest, and we'll flesh this suggestion out in subsequent discussions, I suggest that it's useful and not oversimplistic to think of the world as centered on three different kinds of economic and contact zones during the post-classical period as a whole. Zone 1 focused on the Arab world, the Byzantine Empire, India, and China. Zone 1 is what, if we were using the language of today, we would call the developed world. These were the areas that built most clearly on the achievements of the classical civilizations, whether those classical civilizations had split apart or not. These were the areas that had the most sophisticated manufacturing systems. These were the areas, certainly, that had the largest cities, as travelers to the regions would routinely note. These were the areas, on the whole, that had the most sophisticated, opulent upper classes and artistic styles of life. This was the developed world. And this was the region also that tended to have the most elaborate political structures as measured by size of bureaucracy and that sort of thing. These centers of Zone 1 civilizations traded actively with each other, exchanging different kinds of manufactured products. They copied each other. For example, the Byzantine Empire systematically worked to introduce a silk industry that they copied from, possibly stole from China. There's some interesting stories about how they got their first silkworms, smuggling them out of Chinese territory. These were the areas that had the most elaborate kinds of industry and commercial activity. They were the most prosperous sectors in the world. But around these Zone 1 centers, literally geographically around them, came a host of societies where civilization was newer as a form of human organization, sometimes brand new indeed, where trading connections could be forged with the Zone 1 societies, but where also patterns of imitation could develop deliberately, such that this Zone 2 ring would be able to develop different kinds of apparatus, particularly cultural apparatus and economic apparatus, more quickly than if simply left to their own devices. So a circle of societies that, to one extent or another, deliberately imitate Zone 1 achievements in selective ways would include Japan, parts of Southeast Asia that borrow actively from India, China, and later the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, Russia, and Northwestern Europe, a zone where developments in this period were particularly crucial, in many ways particularly formative, but formative in the sense of combining initiatives from the regions themselves with this pattern of imitation based on new levels of contact, new levels of commercial exchange. And finally, we will have to note, though a few sessions hence, that a third significant part of the human map of the civilized experience developed in this period in exciting ways, but in no contact, no effective contact whatsoever with either Zone 1 or Zone 2, an area of isolation that simply has to be treated in different terms from those parts of the world actively connected to the world network. The two major themes of this period raise one or two final points. First of all, assessing significance. Converting peoples to one of the major world religions, and by the end of the post-classical period, most people in the world, counting by head, were either Buddhist, Christian, or Muslim, or possibly Hindu. So significant changes in the world's religious map. The spread of the world religions obviously involved new kinds of contact, but also new kinds of rivalry and suspicion that become durable parts of the world history environment. But world historians, many of them, would claim that the importance of the new trade connections and the kinds of wider contacts and imitation possibilities that followed deserve even greater emphasis.